We're going to have two sessions now about energy. First of all, how to drive the energy transition.
Baltic countries, Germany, Poland, Benelux countries, and Austria. So basically, a power exchange is where production and consumption meets, and we try to balance that market by organizing a marketplace.
It's that straightforward, is it?
Yeah.
Okay, good. Right. Let's move on immediately, Lisa, to the kind of dilemmas that you've been facing at Vattenfall. You're heavily invested in this country. You're talking about trying to electrify the whole country at high speed, at the speed that's needed for the kind of demand of energy there is. But recently you pulled out of a contract for offshore wind because you said you wouldn't make any money because the regulation and the licensing simply didn't allow you to have the kind of costs you needed. Now, how do you balance all of that between demand and the realities of what you're trying to do?
Yeah, absolutely. And good morning, everybody. Yeah, I think it's a dilemma, and part of the challenge we've got is that the climate crisis we're facing right now has smashed straight into a big macroeconomic crisis. I think, as we all know, we've seen inflation go up, we've seen costs go up, and unfortunately, the support frameworks that the government have in place for offshore renewables just haven't kept pace. I'm hoping it's a blip. I hope that we can move beyond that. We're very much looking forward to the next auction.
But there was an auction a couple of weeks ago. No one applied.
There was, and that's because the level of support that was on offer by the UK government just wasn't enough. I think the UK government remains very committed to offshore wind, or remains very committed to the energy transition. I think they got their numbers wrong.
They got their numbers wrong. Have you told them that? And what's been their reaction? Will they get more positive response to the next licensing round?
Yeah, I mean, in answer to the first question, it's not going to be a surprise to anybody that yes, we have told them that, as have other developers. So I think they know they got the numbers wrong. They know they got the numbers wrong because no one bid in the auction, right? So we are talking to them about what is needed to bring forward the investments. I very, very much hope that they will listen. We will get those numbers, the new numbers, in a few weeks, and let's see.
But you have had successes, like you're building a new project which is going to create 1,000 jobs in Bristol. Again, the principle of new ideas.
Yeah, absolutely. So you're talking about heat networks, and obviously, as well as decarbonising electricity and decarbonising transport, we also have to decarbonise heat. It's a huge problem. Just one stat to throw at you: the Committee of Climate Change has said that by 2050, 18% of heat production is going to have to come from heat networks. And unlike in Sweden, we don't have a great history of heat networks in this country, but we are looking to expand in the UK. We have 3 great projects very live at the moment. Bristol, as you've reflected, Nick, but also we're looking at heat networks in Midlothian, on the outskirts of Edinburgh, and also in London and Brent Cross.
Can you develop and install and get permission at the kind of speed that's necessary to meet the energy demand?
Yeah, no, not at the moment. But there's a lot. Just because the regulation isn't in place yet, and I think everybody's trying to catch up with heating. It's been the poor relation of the energy transition, but we are now seeing movement. And just one example of that, Bristol, I think, is a great city. They have a citywide ambition to be net zero by 2030. And in the centre of Bristol, where we're looking at heat networks, so Vattenfall took over the Bristol heat network in January 23, and we're now looking to expand, refurbish and connect to make a much bigger heat network down there. And in the centre of Bristol, Bristol City Council have implemented a mandation to connect, which means if you're refurbishing a building in the centre of Bristol or building a new building, you have to connect to the heat network. And that's been a game changer. I think it shows you what can be done if there's some political...
So you're creating new models which could be replicated right across the country?
They could, absolutely.
But what about the planning restrictions and also the restrictions on cabling? The fact that the cable companies say they don't even have enough cable until 2030, I think, to do everything that's necessary.
Yeah, so I mean, there's a problem with HVDC cable, which is the cable that we need to build the offshore wind farms. Yeah, that's a huge issue, and the supply chains haven't actually managed to catch up. So yeah, supply is a problem. But I think that what we will hope to see is that if we can give the supply chain confidence that there will be lots of offshore wind farms, for instance, coming forward, that will be the incentive for them to build their factories.
So when Alok reminds us that we've got to reduce by 40% our emissions, these are blockages in the way that the UK can move on this.
Yeah, and I think Alec put it very well. I mean, I don't think the blockages are unknown. You know, they're pretty simple. They're problems with the grid, which isn't big enough. It's not there. We have problems still with planning consent in the UK. It's not fast enough. And I can give you an example of that. Vattenfall's Norfolk offshore wind farm, which is still facing lots of problems. You know, we've been working on that project in development for over 10 years, and it's still not being built. You know, so there's a challenge there. And obviously, we also have the need to make sure that we have investor certainty in the UK for these projects. And what I mean by that is that developers like Vattenfall, the private sector, will invest in the UK. It's a really good market, but in order to invest in the UK, they really need two things, which is we need to know that we can make an adequate rate of return, because we are private sector companies, and we also need some certainty that return will come. And this takes us full square back, I think, to Rishi Sunak's speech, which I think was, you know, in a lot of ways what he said was very helpful, but it does shake that investor confidence a little bit.
It was a detour.
It was a detour and helpful. Yeah.
But has it sent a negative signal, or a degree of a signal of caution?
I think if you afford, you probably yes. I mean, for Vattenfall, it's a little bit wait and see. There was some very positive things said by the Prime Minister about the need for grid reform, but we are now waiting to see the roadmap, and obviously the need for speed. There's a few sort of touch points that are coming out. We have party conference that we're coming up next week for the Conservatives, where we would expect some keynote speeches. Let's see what they say. We're also looking ahead to the autumn statement. And then I guess beyond that, we're into general election and manifestos.
But there's a lot going on.
There is.
To balance. Okay, I should say that Bristol say that you're gonna make 600 million out of the project there, and therefore this is a very cost-effective commitment for you.
Yeah, I mean, we're not a charity, so Vattenfall will only invest where we can make
it's profitable for you potentially.
Yeah,
yeah,
good. It is.
Tom, I haven't forgotten you, but obviously you come at it from a different angle, particularly on the flexibility needed, especially on demand. How much do we really have to change the way we think about energy in order just to get what we need?
Yeah, I think that's such a key question, because we all know that we need to decarbonize the energy mix, energy production, energy used for heating and for other industries to address the 75%. And renewable is great because it is, to a large extent, the cheapest technology we have now, and it is emission-free. The only disadvantage with the renewable is that it's intermittent. It's not flexible. You can't really regulate it. And that's a huge challenge to the energy system, because we have an energy system that is built up on something that is dispatchable, that you can regulate, you produce when you want to. With renewable, we don't have that benefit, and that's why we need to compensate for that lack of flexibility on the production side by creating more flexibility on the demand side.
How could that work?
Well, it could be. I mean, for the industry, you can create a great competitive advantage because when you have surplus energy is almost for free. Sometimes it is, you even get paid to offload. So I think if the industry can find ways to consume more energy when the energy is cheap, it is great, because that's a competitive advantage. So that's one way of regulating. I also think that we need to find other ways to regulate the consumption side by creating storage solutions, by, in some countries, pumped hydro solutions. Hydrogen is also a way to take advantage of that surplus energy at times that you could deploy into the system when there is a deficit situation, when you have too little. I also think that we need to look at other what we in the industry call base loads, because you can't have a system running entirely. It's not realistic to have a system running entirely on renewable. You need some base loads, and the base loads you have today, it's hydro, could be nuclear, could be hydrogen in the future. You need to have some of that at the sort of bottom, because to make the residual on top not to be too big.
But there are enormous lead times for all that.
That's a challenge. I mean, we see that.
You mean it's a problem more than a challenge, isn't it?
It's a problem. It's a problem. It takes 8 years from a wind farm going from a planning stage to a production stage. And we need to make these decisions now. We need to speed up this because we know that consumption is going to increase, highly increase with the electrification of society. And in order to be able to phase out coal and gas in order to reach the climate targets, we need much more renewable energy.
Anyone want to come in? Let's get the microphones moving around. Put your hand up, please. We've got about 10 minutes to run, but there are 2 microphones. Please do enter the discussion if you'd like to, and I'll keep an eye open. But what have you seen, particularly in the last 18 months since the Ukraine crisis, about how people have changed their consumption of electricity?
Yeah, we see that we say you need to preserve the price signal of energy because that is reflecting a surplus or a deficit situation in the underlying fundamentals. So we have seen that people have been responding to higher prices by consuming less or consuming at different times. We have also seen in many countries.
So they're making the choices themselves to actually reduce consumption. You're seeing patterns like that, are you? Both
Absolutely.
Industrially and also consumers.
We saw that consumption across Europe fell 100 TWh last year. We have seen it fell 140 TWh this year. That's 250 TWh. TWh we produced 3,500 TWh of electricity in Europe, and we have seen 8-9% fall in consumption. And we think that is a response to, of course, high prices, but it's also a response to societies, countries like Germany, putting mandated consumption reduction on industry and residentials.
Are people reacting to high prices, or are they just simply doing this because it's the right thing to do?
I think they are reacting to high prices. They are reacting to requirements coming from the government, and some are definitely also reacting because it's the right thing to do.
Anyone want to come in? I'll keep asking the question. Yes, please, get some microphone down here. Thank you. And do please introduce yourselves.
I'm Alexandra Martinez. This might be a little bit
Put
of
the
a
microphone,
science fiction
Alexandra.
question.
Put the microphone closer to your mouth.
Alexandra Martinez from Klotavade. It seems to me that Mr. Sharma was talking about the challenges about national grids, not just in the UK. There's a huge delay on the transmission side, the distribution side, and we have a lot of challenges. One wonders if perhaps one of the many other solutions is how to create microgrids in the smaller, like the Bristol cases. And I wonder, I mean, how innovative are we within that? Because I'm seeing delays of hooking up or, wind farms or other kind of renewables taking more than 18 to 36 months lead time before they can even get a transmission, put up.
All
so
right,
my question is, how can we create another solution than just waiting for planning permission? It's another way of doing it.
Because Lisa, in one of the discussions we had, you said really that the grid has to operate rather differently now. We've got to redesign it. We've got to re-engineer it, but that of course takes time and a lot of risk taking.
Yeah, it does. And I mean, the simple way to think about it is that the grid is in the wrong place. So when the grid was, I think, first constructed in the UK, it was constructed in a world where we had a relatively large number, a relatively small number of quite big power stations. We're now moving to a world where we have much more generation assets, offshore wind, and they're in a completely different place. So we need to reconfigure the grid. We need to reinforce it. And you may want to comment more on this, Tom, but we also need to make sure that the grid can much more flow 2 ways and is much more digitally attuned, I think.
I fully agree. And I think it's an interesting question because I think we need to be able to. I mean, we get more decentralized production assets also with rooftops, with solar on the rooftops, and you can maybe also in the future leverage all the flexibility that will be stored in an electrical vehicle park. So I think to unlock some of that flexibility, to leverage some of that flexibility. Will be great, and it will be a part of the solution. And I think I also think that we will get in the future more of a sort of local community, self sort of sufficient production and consumption units. But again, it's very much related to the grid and the investments and the sort of where we are on that side.
What's your view of how vulnerable we really are there? We're talking conventionally in many ways. There are a lot of interconnectors bringing power backwards and forwards. The new one to Norway, for example, the one to France had a bad accident and was disconnected for many months. But there's also the security problem of what our friends in, maybe not friends, but those in Moscow and maybe in Beijing, ideas they have of taking action against us. In other words, really affecting our ability to survive with power. How vulnerable are we on that front? Because the Chief of Defence Staff makes it very clear here.
I think we are vulnerable. I mean, we have seen that last year. It's still unclear who's behind it, but we are vulnerable, obviously. And if you look at the North Sea, that's a great example. It's actually very difficult in the end to monitor and to protect such a vast area after all. But with interconnectors, interconnectors are going to be more important than ever in the renewable age, because we need to be able to move energy from a surplus area to a deficit area to maximize social welfare.
But is there a danger of being over-reliant on these interconnectors, given the security situation, which tragically is developing at the moment?
I think countries, a country like Denmark, for instance, who are clearly in a deficit situation in terms of their own production. I mean, I think countries need to take that into account, that we need to be at a certain level of self-sufficiency and not depend too much on the interconnectors. I clearly think that's something that is being more considered now than before.
Okay, anyone want to come in? We've got 4 minutes to run. Please, Alexandra, you can come in again. Is there anyone else? Quickly.
Back regarding the interconnectors, this is a UK only question, and perhaps both of you. We know that the interconnectors down from Scotland down, the excess power does not come down. We're having biomass and coal here in London, and correct me if I'm wrong, etc. My question is that we keep doing the same old. It's like, okay, the National Grid has a procurement process on getting funding to get more transmission and so on and so on. But it's too little too late. We need to do some a little bit faster. That's why I ask.
All right, can I take that as a clear point? Because I've only got 3 minutes left, please.
Thank you very much. My name is Carl-Oskar Westerlund. I work at Business Sweden. I have a question regarding the carbonization of heat, as you mentioned. And I think it's a question to the two of you, actually. I think in the UK, there's a discussion now phasing out gas boilers using either heat pumps or...
We're going to talk about that in the next session in 3 minutes' time.
Okay.
So hold that question.
Okay, sorry. Is the UK ready to implement heat pumps from a grid perspective, or should we use district heating instead?
Store that one because, well, storage, energy storage, because we're going to be talking about that in the next session in 3 minutes. So stay where you are. The question will be long, please.
Hi, Renato Beltran from SEB. It's a question for Lisa. What type of solutions are you giving to the government or alternatives rather than going with, okay, the strike price for the CFDs it's too low because cost of inflation and so forth. But what solutions are you offering the government to ponder on?
And can I wrap that in with what was going to be my final question? How definitive do you expect a government to be to help you on both the tracks that you've been talking about, Lisa?
Yeah, I mean, I think government has to step in. So, we talk about this perfect storm that developers are facing at the moment with, the Ukraine war, we've got inflation, we've got rising costs of capital. These concerns are well known. Government didn't create that perfect storm, to be very clear, but we do need their help to get us beyond that. So we do need them to be definitive. And the CFD scheme, the financial support for offshore wind developers, which we actually call a financial stabilization mechanism, because actually developers have been giving back on that scheme to Treasury, without getting into too much detail. But yeah, we do need their help, and we do need to have a clear signal in the next few months that they are behind offshore wind and they're going to put in place the measures that will allow us to invest.
Tom. final word.
Yeah, I want to say that I think I've spent so much time with politicians, policymakers during the last year, and I
Have you enjoyed it?
It's been a learning full experience for me. No, but we have a communication challenge. We don't have the buy-in, the buy-in we need in the population for why we need more renewable energy. So we have so many not in my backyard discussions. And I think we need to sort of crack that challenge in order to move forward faster. And I think it boils down to some sort of it's a communication challenge we have not succeeded with properly.
I share your view, but we've got an election coming up.
Yeah.
Okay, both of you, thank you very much indeed, Lisa and Tom. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.